right. So we are good to go on Facebook Live. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Sorry about the wait. But, so I'm Brian Kaiser from Black and Bitter Coffee and Books in Duncanville, Texas. We specialize in building a community around a great book or over a perfect cup of coffee. So recently I made a commitment to start conversations with my customers and friends about 3 topics. First being criminal justice, the second being voter rights and voter suppression, and the third being environmental concerns. So these are 3 legs of the Black Lives Matter movement that I felt like I could have a positive impact on in the community with the help of others. Tonight we'll be discussing criminal justice, in particular youth justice, with some special guests. So let me introduce you to the special guests that we have, and special guests, please wave so everybody knows who you are. First up, Mr. Leon Theodore has a master's in social work, leader of Potential Equals Progress, look them up on Facebook, and partner in the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. Second up, Tyler Ransom, student at Texas A&M, majoring in political science, and graduate of Duncanville High School. We have Dr. Fred A. Jones, founder of Jones 2000 Empowerment, 30+ years in advocacy and education enrichment, a valued part of the after-school space. So welcome, Dr. Jones. We have Jackie Colton, Assistant Director of Public Works in Duncanville, Texas. Also a member of the Duncanville ISD Board of Trustees, place 1. We've got E. Jean Pemberton Jones, an educator, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, owner of End of Boutique. She's the president of Pemberton Jones Education Group. Megan Reed, Director of Public Policy with Mental Health America of Greater Dallas. So welcome on. And Tracy Turner, educator in Mesquite ISD, activist for equality in education and ending the school to prison pipeline. So just a note for everybody, this is a fully active event. We're gonna have plenty of Q&A time after the speakers are done talking. Please leave your comments on the Facebook Live video if you have any questions, and we're gonna address as many as possible. We should have plenty of time to do all of them. So first up, I'd like to introduce again Mr. Leon Theodore. He'd have some things that he'd like to speak with everyone about. Then we'll have a few other speakers and some time for Q&A. So Leon?
How are you, Brian? What I wanted to talk about today was Perception Equals Potential. That's the name of the project we have here in for TCJC. First of all, TCJC is here to end our mission is to end mass incarceration and to benefit the communities that are affected by mass incarceration. So I'm the Dallas County project advocate, and I started Perception Equals Potential to possibly end or hopefully end the school to prison pipeline here in Dallas. And we're doing that through coalition building and also through policy changes. The school to prison, I'm not sure if everyone knows what the school to prison pipeline is, but what that is a name for a theory used to cover systems of control. It is the use of over-discipline and zero tolerance policies that affect mainly Black and brown students or students of color. The practices also come about because of the use of exclusionary discipline practices, which means out-of-school suspension, in-school suspension, things of that sort, and referrals to DAEPs. So that's a short version of what the school to prison pipeline is. Like I said, PEP is here to end that through building of coalitions and through policy practice change.
right, well, thank you very much. So next up, we do have a few other speakers. Dr. Jones is still on. Would you like to expand on any of that or speak to any points that Mr. Theodore is covering that you'd like to share?
We have to always be aware. Am I able to be heard? Because everybody hear me? Good, good. We have to always be aware, I think, that we know that prisons actually start monitoring their beds or how many people they believe they will have in their facilities based upon third grade education or lack of it. So if you're not reading at the third grade level, or if you're having problems in schools, particularly in preschool and early primary education, then the likelihood of you being able to finish school decreases, the likelihood of you getting into some kind of juvenile trouble increases, and therefore you wind up, they bet that you will end up in the prison system, because we know that the prison system is a moneymaker, and it always has been. And particularly, again, when we talk about Black and brown children, it affects the community. So that causes a breakdown in the community, because if the young men can't grow up to be a man, then they can't take their role and responsibilities in the community. It breaks up families. And so what we're trying to do, and why I joined with Leon, because we've been involved in this a long time, why I joined with Leon and some of the other people on the panel, is because it's going to take all of us collectively. And right now we're in a very, very unique time period, particularly with the pandemic, because education has been abbreviated. And we're not sure when it's going to continue back up again in the process that it used to be. And quite frankly, it needs to be dismantled anyway, because it wasn't working the way that it should. And there's some things that we really need to do to institute a better quality of education and a better quality of awareness, so that this prison to pipeline system, we start putting some dents in it.
All right, great, thank you. Leon, how do you believe the city of Duncanville and the Duncanville ISD does when it comes to the topics that we're talking about, the school to prison pipeline, the excessive discipline, mental health and well-being of students? Do you have any comparison stats between Duncanville, Dallas, or any other samples?
I do. Duncanville does relatively well as far as ISDs go, particularly with out-of-school suspensions and DAP referrals. Duncanville usually in the last reported school year used in-school suspension more than they did out-of-school suspension. In Dallas, kids in middle schools are 8 times more likely to be sent to out-of-school suspension than in-school suspension. And Duncanville, again, uses in-school suspension twice as much. But I must preface that by saying that any exclusionary disciplinary practice is bad for the student and for the community and for the school. It's been proven, it's been shown that exclusionary discipline affects adversely students by it creates more aggression when they are given in or out of school suspension. But out of school suspension, like Dr. Fred said, leads to lack of wanting to be in school. Kids are more than likely not to finish school. So then, and those kids are more likely to end up in the justice system. But as far as, you know, if you want to make a comparison between bad and worse, I'd say Duncanville does a better job with their in-school, with their disciplinary issues. But again, we can't, any child left behind or any child excluded from education or from the learning track that they're on is a bad practice. So that's what we're here to do, is to put practices in place that will keep kids in school, that will changed how the ISDs view their youth, the education of their youth. There absolutely is no reason, I think, for having exclusionary practices. I think we can do everything we need by keeping kids in school, including more social workers in school, and involving the community in the schools and in their learning and in their disciplinary, if you want to call it disciplinary practices.
So what grade does out-of-school suspension start in? And are these all mandatory out-of-school suspensions, or are they discretionary? Could we have done them in school, or like when does it start, and how big of a leeway does the school system have to make that decision?
So by code, by TAA code, we're not, disciplinary out-of-school suspensions are supposed to start after age 6. So anything, it's not legal to suspend kids before that. But even then, that's too young, because what you're doing is changing how the youth see themselves. They take on a perception of themselves that they're bad, that there's something wrong, they're different from others. How a kid reacts to education and the learning system or cycle, that's individualized. You can't make a square peg fit in a round hole. So, and everyone is not a round hole. We don't all learn the same. So thereby, again, we don't all accept discipline the same as well. I think we need to make better use, again, of our social workers and putting things in place that will help kids understand the trauma that they're going through, the issues that they have as they're growing up, emotional issues. We're all emotional beings. We have to be more individualistic in our learning, I think, and making things more specific to youth, to our youth. Positive reinforcement goes a lot farther than negative reinforcement. So.
Okay. Thanks. That is great information. We're lucky enough to have an educator on the panel as well. Ms. Tracy, what have you seen as an educator when it comes to the school to prison pipeline and disciplinary practices, out of school suspension? What's an answer here? What's an avenue that may not have been tested?
So I want to talk to the No Child Left Behind first, because it's not what most people realize it is. No Child Left Behind actually is unrealistic for so many of our kids, especially at the young ages that we start enforcing it. It's been proven that the STAR test is actually 2 levels higher than most kids are actually at. So it's set up to fail. And what it does is it causes so much more work on educators' side that they tend to just push kids through, even if they're not ready. And it doesn't really highlight their needs, because it comes back to us and we're the one that has to answer for why our kids didn't pass. So the No Child Left Behind is not actually successful, in my opinion, at all. Okay. I also think that ISS and things like that are just like prison in a way, because there's no reforming going on. There's no counseling. There's no anything. There's really not any teaching going on either. So it's like sending them to prison for a short period of time and coming back, and they're just further behind.
Understood. Thank you.
Brian, so how does since we have someone from the mental health aspect, how does the mental health aspect play into the in-school suspensions, into the discipline process? I'd like to know.
So Thank you for bringing that up. So I'm Megan Reed. I'm with Mental Health America of Greater Dallas. If you are unaware of our organization, we really focus on early intervention of mental health. So through screening and through education and awareness, trying to eliminate the stigma. And so when we're looking at the school to prison pipeline from a mental health perspective, when you're engaging in in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension, instead of looking at the mental health point of view, we really want to look at their behaviors and maybe their experiences as to why they are out, maybe giving some aggressive behavior, maybe giving some behavior that teachers will want to enforce in school suspension or out-of-school suspension, and really take a step back and see what that child's experiences might be, their environment. So either they are in an aggressive environment, are they being bullied or cyberbullied? Do they have any trauma, previous trauma? And so when we're looking at the school to prison pipeline, we want to look at a way to disrupt that pipeline. And by engaging these children into programs where we look at their mental health and not just go straight to a disciplinary action. When we're looking at youth in general, most youth, around 70%, have experienced a traumatic event in their life. And so we really need to take a step back and look at these experiences that these kids are going through and what is the mental health impact of this. And I think that's one of the biggest topics, or one of the most important topics that we need to discuss is, a lot of the programming that we're discussing on this right now goes into their behavior and goes into the future outlook. And like you said, by third grade, they're already trying to anticipate the future of these children's lives. And I think it's not great. We're not giving them a chance to participate and to learn from their experiences, gain coping skills. So I'm really glad to be on this discussion, because I think one of the first and most important steps is to talk about it and to bring up the mental health issue and the behavioral health issues instead of going directly into disciplinary action.
All right, perfect. Now we do have a comment that came through on Facebook Live that I would, let me direct towards Leon first. And that is from Craig Tennant. How do we provide support versus discipline?
Say that again?
How do we provide support versus discipline?
Support comes from understanding who the kid is, understanding their issues, understanding what their past is, the context of the situation. So many kids we have out-of-school suspensions and in-school suspensions, or referrals, I should say, that are discretionary. And just like Megan was saying, there's discretionary referrals, which means that the kid necessarily hasn't done anything against TEA code that demands that they be removed from school or put into a DAP or removed from the classroom. What we're running into is that just off of any minor infraction, what we're talking about is the school to prison pipeline and Black Lives Matter, more Black and brown kids are being removed from school or having exclusionary practices used against them for minor infractions. So if we look at what's going on with the kid, what can we do? Why is the child acting out? There may be some emotional issues. There's trauma maybe in the home. When you think about 20% of the referrals are economically disadvantaged youth or as a SPED youth, special education, there are issues that are going on that need to be dealt with before you even talk about how can the child learn. You need to understand that they are going through, that they have issues, that they need support, that they need someone that believes in them, that as a teacher or an educator, and Tracy, maybe you can talk to this next, that how you view the child and how you react to the child help is the support that they need. So in supporting them, I think what we need first, as both Megan and Tracy and Fred, all three said, is that we need to look at the situation. We need to look at the child. We need to understand what the child is going through. Take more time to do that. Education is about the youth. And until we actually focus on the youth and stop trying to, like you said, keep children in school and move kids forward and keep this well-oiled machine going, we're going to continue with more of the same.
Great, thank you. Dr. Jones, anything to add?
I think one thing we have to always be really mindful of is that in Brown versus Board of Education, when they say schools are supposed to be created equal, all schools are still not created equal. And, you know, because of finances, because of where that child lives, because of what the parents do or don't do, when we're talking about the prison to school pipeline, we're talking about certain communities that have been tapped for almost failure. From the way they eat, you know, they come to school hungry. Some of them are unsheltered, so they're living in dire conditions. They're seeing abuse that goes on in the home, so they're growing up with that. And as you know, so that goes to the mental. But then when Tracy gets them, you know, this child is already, you know, somewhat damaged. And so we have to try and fix that. And so to the question about support, one of the things that I noticed over my years, and there's been a few of them, is that there usually isn't a lot of support. And the parents don't know how to support it because the parents are not there. And so it becomes incumbent upon those of us that are here to try and work with a child that's already had this, you know, coming in at a disadvantage. Now, however, the good thing is if they do receive the proper support, we are usually able to, and I don't want to use the word salvage because that's insensitive, but we are usually able to resurrect them to a point to where they can move on, because if they get an opportunity to see a light, they'll usually take it. Because we normally do we normally do after school programs. That's been our main thing. So once, you know, what do we do with the child once school is over? So I think that support has to come from the community. We have to make sure that the parents understand how to even support what the teacher is training the child to be like, because sometimes they don't get that same reinforcement when they get home, and then you have to start all over again almost in some situations.
All right, great, thank you. Any of the other panelists, would you like to chime in on that question? How do we provide support versus discipline from Craig?
I can say a couple of words about it. I believe that in order for students to receive the support that they need from their teachers, teachers also need to receive the support that they need from schools. It doesn't make sense that teachers are the ones being the primary disciplinarians, and yet whenever students are removed from the classroom and they go to ISS, OSS, for Duncanville Summit, which would be DAEP, there is no middleman between that process of being removed from the classroom and then being put back into the classroom. And so what you have is a student who's displayed disruptive behaviors, and now there is no, once again, there's no connection between, okay, well, why is this student behaving in this way? What's probably happening at home? Instead, it's kind of like a shaming tactic of, oh, you're poorly misbehaved, you're a bad student, you don't deserve to be in class. And so from that point on, especially since it happens when it happens from youth, that process just continues. And I don't think that they ever get the help that they need. So I think that, for one, like everyone has said, how teachers can be more supportive of students, we also need for our school systems to be more supportive of our teachers in disciplining students.
Great point.
Tracy, let me ask you something. When you were going to school, what did you notice? Because I notice sometimes when we're in the schools and we're walking around in halls, like, for example, we had when Leon was talking about it, and this is pretty interesting, Brian, because we're trying to get people that could come into your develop so they can be old enough to drink coffee and read books and support you. But we had incident where we had 6-year-olds, a 6-year-old first grader that was like in ISS, and we're looking at him and I'm thinking, well, he yelled at the teacher and kicked the teacher. I'm like, you? No, we don't do that. So when I kind of just, he like, no. So how do you see that the students that were disrupted were dealt with while you were in school?
So it's kind of a double-edged sword for us, because if something happens in our classroom, there's 20 other kids that are going to go home and tell their parent about it. So if somebody gets hit or bit, you know that you're going to have to end up answering to other parents. But if you send them out, then you're answering to their parents. So it's really, we have to cover ourselves in a way, but we have to address it. And we have no other mechanism to address it other than ISS. If we don't send them out, nobody will come in and help us. You can't just call the counselor and say, hey, this one's having an emotional problem right now. Can you come in and help? But we don't have the resources for that. Another huge problem is zoning. Our schools are zoned, so they put all these kinds of kids together and these kind of kids together. So teacher turnover is just incredibly high at my school because people want to go to the suburban white schools where it's easier. And that's a huge problem. You don't build relationships like that.
What I wanted to ask was, so Craig did ask about support versus discipline. What do you think what does support look like to you as an educator?
My school actually is doing something different this year. We have our normal counselor that handles like all the paperwork and stuff, but they've actually hired more of a social work type counselor to come in this year because our school is set up to fail. Our kids are set up to go to crime and all of that. So they're hoping, Mesquite's kind of doing this trial thing to see if bringing in another type of counselor to deal with the more social emotional part will be helpful. There's so much work with IEPs and all that kind of stuff that it's too much for one person. Our campus has 800 kids. It's just, we don't have the resources.
Right, and I would like to say something on that as well, and something that Dr. Jones said, making all schools equal in a way that they have the same resources, funding, ensuring that they have enough counselors or social workers so that they could fill in that gap. There are programs out there. There's Encourage Positive Behavioral Interventions and support programs that are designed to implement school-wide curriculum, teaching students social skills, school expectations, development skills, and protective factors for family, and providing comprehensive individualized, so for the student, interventions, so that we take a look at each student that are having these social emotional issues, and we can tackle this in a group manner where the teachers are involved, the counselors are involved, and these programs work. So I think that if we were to implement programs that are working, that are effective, that we could give these students and these teachers a chance to build those relationships and to create positive learning environments. Because the school is not just an academic learning environment, it's a social learning environment. And I think it's really important that we take that into effect when thinking about long-term relationships with these children and their overall well-being.
And one of the things I've seen in the data since speaking with Leon about this is in different ISDs, the workload is going to be a lot higher on somebody with that social worker background, the counselors. If I'm not mistaken, I saw a counselor that had 4,000 kids that she was supposed to be monitoring. When you look at that, is there a happy medium? Is there an expected workload on counselors and social workers when it comes to especially that middle school, high school level? Teachers have the perfect classroom size. Do we have that perfect size for counselors and social workers?
Well, when you're looking at Texas, there's about average 430 some odd students per counselor in Texas itself. And like you said, in these urban areas where they have these larger amounts of students, and quite frankly, we need to put more funding into mental health, into counselors, so that they are able to hire more, get social workers into their schools, and to basically increase the network. Because, I mean, how is one person able to manage 4,000 relationships? It's clearly not effective. So I think when we're looking at this long term and looking at this policy wise, we need to be very mindful of where the money is flowing and ensuring that they're getting the resources they need.
And Brian, I think one other thing that I think Megan can really get to, we have a lot of students that are on medication, and they are ADHD, they have all of these different issues that are going on. And when I was coming up back in the day,
early 2000s.
Oh no, I'm a 70s baby. We had areas where those particular students that had learning disabilities or special needs were specifically taught and with a teacher in a smaller environment that was able to work with those students. Nowadays, a lot of these students are mixed in and blended in with everybody else, which is not only unfair to them, but it's not fair to a teacher who's not taught to recognize some of the specific issues that a special needs child might have, and can take up a lot of time, unfortunately, sometimes, which is the time that they legitimately need. So we also know that a lot of children are on medications, which also contributes to behavior issues as well. So those are some of the things that are really doing some things. And so is it Tyler?
It's Tyler.
So what did you see coming up that you would have, as a student, that you felt you would have wanted to have seen changed while you were going to school?
Do you mean as far as discipline or?
Discipline, the whole educational process. What did you see some elements that were missing?
I'll say once I got to high school, because that's around the time when school shootings kind of became, I hate to say, like a thing, and it was really bad. And so I know that the overall idea was to protect students, and I graduated 2018. So it may have been 2017 that Duncanville ISD got its own like campus police, that it got its own unit. So when that happened, I remember that's when like I started seeing metal detectors in schools. That's when I started seeing like actual more than one police guard, like fully armed, had gun, taser, mace, and everything like that. So and I was never really much of a trouble student. I never was in ISS or got sent home or summit, not even for dress code. So I can say one thing that I would have liked to see change was it didn't seem serious. It seemed like they were trying to tell us that we have these security measures in place, we have these discipline measures in place to protect you. But all it did was stress our teachers out, who are now concerned with what times we need to go to the bathroom to protect us from being in the hallways. And it was just other, like, I'll say extraness on them to perform their jobs on top of trying to teach us and get us ready for STAR tests or SAT, ACT. And yeah, it just seemed like the security, I wasn't seeing what they were saying it was there to do. It seemed very random. We would have random backpack checks and it wouldn't be explained to us like what they're looking for, why they're doing it. It was just kind of like, it was chaos. It was like controlled chaos. That's the best way I can put it. I know that probably sounds strange, but yeah, that's the best way that I can explain it. So yeah.
Okay. You explained that perfectly.
Okay.
Perfect. That's exactly what it's like. Thank you for saying that.
I wanted to chime in. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian.
Oh, no, go ahead.
What I wanted to chime in on was the fact that, you know, you were talking about, Megan was saying about resources, and because of what I do, the advocacy and worry and thinking about policy and all of that, you know, I have to give Duncanville ISD its due that they just added, it seemed like without provocation, they added 4 new social workers. They added a wellness program. They added more counselors. They partnered with an outside counseling service. That this was for COVID-19, but hopefully it will be utilized, like you said, for more interaction with the students outside of just COVID. Whereas, you know, when you think about, because my focus is Dallas or Dallas ISD, you know, they just added 57 social workers to that. But when you think about the amount of students that Dallas services, 57 social workers is a drop in the bucket. Like you said, when you have that many relationships, how can you actively or effectively have that many positive, productive relationships? You know, the NSAW states that a school social worker should have no more than 250. And when you have other issues involved, it goes down to 60 to 75. So, you know, and then when we're talking about historical issues like with poverty and being economically disadvantaged, high incarceration rates, especially when we're talking about Dallas, those are all issues that contribute to the need for, or demand the need for, more social workers. We don't need you. We just talked to a student. We hear from a student and a teacher who says that more security is chaos. So why are we still funding this? Why are we not going with proven, researched information that says that social workers and social work programs reduce discipline issues? Why are we still investing in things that have proven to not only harm the students, but cause them to be kicked out of school? And it doesn't even solve their issues. I mean, we've got someone that from the mental health sector, we have a teacher, we have students, got advocates. I think it's time to finally talk about solutions and real solutions, and seeing that if you make something that says no child left behind, let's really talk about no child left behind and what that really entails. And it doesn't entail kicking kids out of school.
I think
I just wanted to,
like, the people who are making these decisions are not educators. That's the biggest problem. It's made by TEA that most of them haven't even ever been in a classroom, so they don't really know what the struggle is.
could definitely be a contributor. Now, we did have one more thing before we move on into Tyler's presentation. We have from Tish Waters-Hearn bring up a really important point, and one that I haven't seen raised, and that's exactly why we have these type of forums, to hear from people like Tish and people like Craig ask these questions. It's a great conversation starter, and I don't know if these types of things happen. That's why we have this panel of experts. So what Tish brings up is, can we have social support groups for the parents, possibly a PTA-sponsored endeavor, so that parents and students are learning the same coping strategies and are encouraged to practice them together? Is this something that we've seen piloted in other school districts? Is this something that we believe would work?
So I'll go first. So there are several, so just to say, there are many mental health organizations out there who are willing to help schools implement coping or any sort of curriculum or mental health guided coping strategies. And I urge everybody to use those resources. Organizations like ours that provide support groups or anti-victimization programming. And those resources are out there to help engage parents with teachers and students and every single professional in the school with mental health guided education. So I would say that there are working programs, and there was legislation that was passed in the last session that is supposed to guide schools into implementing mental health education to not only students. It is a cooperation effort between students, teachers, and all school staff. So I think the biggest point here is that it's not only on the backs of students and it's not only on the backs of teachers. Whenever we're implementing these mental health resources, we all play a part in it. As community members, as staff in schools, and that we have to make sure that we engage this mental health education so that we can really take part into the well-being of these students, because these programs are effective if you use them correctly. Right now, they are supposed to be being implemented or at least planned out. I believe due to COVID, it's kind of pushed it back a little bit, but I think it's important that the public is aware that there are policies in place to help implement these types of education in schools, and that we need to really keep an eye out for it.
Perfect, thank you. So just left a response to Tish on the Facebook feed there. A few comments coming in. And then we'll take the last question as it relates to what Mr. Theodore was speaking about and Dr. Jones. Another from Craig. He says, seems like the schools don't have the budget to increase counselors. So how can we engage professionals from the community to contribute? So there's probably a two-part question. We'll start with Mr. Leon again. A, the schools don't have the budget to increase counselors. So how do we address that as a community? And then B, how could we engage professionals from the community to help contribute? Leon, can you take A and B there? Let me know if you didn't catch them.
Yes, I can. I don't claim to be a budget specialist or anything like that, but I know that DISD spent, and I'm only speaking of DISD, spent $24 million on security services. They spent $2 million on social work services. That in of itself is, I mean, that speaks for itself. That where you spend your money speaks to where your heart is. And I think if we, there's a call for defunding the police, getting in, and that's a deeper, more in-depth subject or conversation. But if you take money from what's proven not to work, and put the funding to what is proven to work. I mean, we just moved 4.2 million, 4.4 million around for the 57 social workers in DISD. I did make a recommendation for 8 million to be taken from the security budget so that we could have 114 social workers. I think that's possible. I think, and I must make this clarification. Those social workers that we were talking about when you said that they had 4,000 or 2,000, a caseload of that number, those were only traditional schools. Those were only majority Black and brown enrollment schools. So that again speaks to how overloaded the workload is. So, and that was only in two sectors of DISD. So if you're asking, can it be done? I believe it can. You just have to put your money where your heart is, you know, and where you spend your money says where your heart is. And I think that, you know, DISD the trustees can make an actual change if they just, you know, would take the time or the resources that they have and just repurpose them. So defund the police is possible. That does not mean that you lose any security issues. You just place money and resources where it's proven to work. And again, tell me the second part of that question, Brian. Brian? Uh-oh, I think we lost him.
No, part B to that question here. Sorry, the names were jumping around in Zoom here. Part B to that question was, how can we engage professionals from the community to contribute?
And that is a big thing. You know, I think community schooling is necessary. I think we need to actually look at how the education system is set up. I mean, education is a whole unit. It's a whole thing. It requires the community involvement and requires teachers to be involved. It requires advocates to be involved. It requires parents to be involved. Everyone needs to have a say in what goes on, because teaching is personal, teaching is individual, and teaching is for the youth. I mean, that's part of being a teacher. So again, supporting the teachers and what they need, spending the money where that goes, figuring out that you need to have the input from the community. DISD did something that was, did a wonderful job with this. Texas Organizing Project, they did a wonderful job of doing participatory budgeting, which was they allowed the schools to decide what they wanted to have done. It was a democratic process, not saying that it was perfect, but that's a start. So, I mean, why can't we have schools, the community be involved in school? That's what school is all about. I mean, because you're creating people that are going back into the community. So if they're not prepared to go in the community and make a better community, it's not the child's fault. It's the school system's fault. So that's my take on that. I know Dr. Slade had something to say.
The village. We have to always acknowledge now, like Tyler said, is that we're in a different time period because of security issues. So anybody that wants to, they just can't come into the school. There has to be, sometimes schools require background checks. There's some other precautions that have to be brought up and brought in. So, but that doesn't preclude. Give me a really good example. As I was speaking several years ago with the superintendent at Highland Park, they were celebrating their centennial at Highland Park School District. And I was talking with the superintendent, and I was just asking him, how do they manage to do this? Now, we know that Highland Park is, has a very large budget in that school, but he said the one thing that they do is they require each parent to volunteer. That means sometimes they're working in the cafeteria, they're working in the library, but each parent literally has to volunteer some time in the school that their child is going to. And so he was very adamant and said, yes, we do have the money, but it's not just about the money, it's the involvement of the community that helps make Highland Park what it is, more so than the opportunities of the finances. And we know that in some of our communities, there's not that willingness to involve themselves, because when a child is in, especially if a child's in trouble, sometimes when the parent comes up to the school, that can be a disruptive situation, dealing with the parents. And so that creates embarrassing dynamic for the child. So when we talk about active participation from the community, that is needed and that is wanted, but it has to be properly gauged and monitored so that it is fulfilling, as opposed to everybody just haphazardly coming up into the school, wanting to go into a classroom or wanting to do that. So the answer to the question is, go to the school that you want to, get to know the counselor, get to know who the principal is, find out what their requirements are for you to do that, and then just volunteer your time. Because a lot of companies, quiet as it's kept, are keeping our schools going because a lot of companies are giving money, they're giving resources, and people are coming back because they realize that the future of my job, the future of my company is going to rest with these same students that are in these schools. And I need them to be able to be productive. I need people that are in the community that will come and buy coffee. Or I need people that are going to be able to do this. And you can't do that if you don't have the education and you're not making the money. So the investment is critical. And that's where I am. I think I just now know, and then I'm going to close with my last comment is this, is the COVID thing is creating this unique opportunity to change the structure. Because we now have, it slowed things down. We can, everybody's standing back, taking a breath, and it's slowed down so we can change the structure of our education. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we also have to talk about that there's Black crime. There's, we have to stop the fighting because, we fight each other a long time, and they fight because when Megan tell you they're angry and they're pissed off and they don't like each other. So there's anger and we take it out on ourselves. And so we have to address that so that our children don't respond and attack each other as well. And see, that's another area of conversation, Brian, that we have to get into as well.
All right, great. And on Facebook Live, Tish is applauding you, saying, yes, absolutely, Dr. Empower the Village. So you hit home on that. Thank you very much. At this point, I want to transition into Miss Tyler, who we all know did not have a lot of in-school suspension. We know this because her mother is commenting on our Facebook Live and agreeing with that she's very proud of Miss Tyler. So you have a portion of the presentation this evening based on some data from current and former students, other people that have been going through the Duncanville school system about their, their experience with discipline versus social work, their experience of the Duncanville ISD, which obviously, if we were to grade it just on you, it's been a huge success. So we don't just grade it on one person.
Right.
So what have you seen personally? What have you seen from other students? And I believe you had some things to talk with Miss Megan about. So I'll pass it over to you.
Yes. So, like I said, because I personally wasn't the person who, was getting in trouble, I couldn't attest to what that was like. So that's why I decided to reach out to former community, former Duncanville students, mostly in high school, some troubled days where they were a little bit younger, but they can still remember what that felt like. There was also a couple of parents that I was involved with and that I was able to talk to. So the biggest thing that other students told me was they would get in trouble. The teacher would write them up. They would be removed from class. And once they were removed from class, there would either be a principal or a vice principal or some sort of administrator to tell them, this is what you did because of your actions. Your actions have consequences. And so you'll be either going to ISS, OSS, out of school suspension, Summit, DAEP, or in very extreme cases, juvie. I didn't get to talk to anybody who went to juvie, but so, and I asked them, I was like, okay, well, once that process was over, was there any follow-up with you? Was there any talk about your actions, why you did what you did, why it was wrong? And they were just like, no, it was only, you did something wrong. So this is the punishment. And now you get to go back to class. And everybody's response was the same. Well, once I got back to class, I just did what I wanted to do again. So it's like, okay, so not only are you acting out, you get removed. Now we have no accountability and the student is still causing disruption. And they, like I said, they don't take accountability for their actions. I don't know if it's that they don't know or we didn't really get that deep into it. But for students like this, a lot of the perception is just they're bad or they're misbehaved and they get talked down to. One student was even told that she was making her collegiate program look bad, and so she needed to fix her behavior. So in cases like these, when there's repeated, I kind of want to open up the panel again, but when there's repeated consequences for behaviors, what is it that you think is not getting to the student? What do you think the disconnect is for anybody who wants to answer?
One of the disconnects goes back to your mom is watching you on Facebook Live, and you know that you always have a connection with your home base or your parents, or that there's somebody that has an interest in you. Most of the children that I've worked with over the years that were repeatedly getting into some type of disciplinary issue, their support system was solely lacking, and they were never taught how to behave properly, and so they come to school not knowing how to behave properly, and then they have to go home. So once again, we're talking about that reinforcement of values, moral principles, social skills, self-esteem, critical thinking, which is another thing. I know we got SWATs when I was coming up, and with the hose in the paddle. And
yeah.
So I always opted to take the SWATs because I didn't want to go home and deal with my mom and then have to deal with my father as well. So it became incumbent upon me to accept my own consequences and my own responsibilities for my action, and therefore to figure out a way to change that behavior, because I'm going to get a SWAT. Okay, that's some minor discomfort, but I don't want to get the discomfort that's going to come from home. And then we also had peers. So we were also, as peer group, we would put pressure on each other when we didn't do the things that we were supposed to do. Come on, man, that's not right. Or you need to change your behavior. We don't have that now. There are no, and last thing I think will really help is there was an animal resort or animal reserve place. And anyway, they had hippopotamuses and all that, but they had these young bull elephants. And I was watching this documentary, and the bull elephants had taken over everything. They were bullying hippopotamuses, just running roughshod over everybody, and they didn't know what to do with these young bull elephants. So what they eventually did was they went out and they brought in about 3 older male elephants. And as soon as they brought the older male elephants in, the behavior of the younger bull elephants changed. The bull elephants were never taught how to be elephants, because and that's what happens with gangs. You got these youngsters, and then the OGs get arrested. And so, and this keeps on perpetuating this cycle. And so we don't have a lot of men in the schools that can help out a lot of these men, these young men that are trying to be men. And so it falls on Tracy to have to deal with the parent. It has to deal with the school board. That has to deal with the child. And young men have to be taught how to be young men when they go to school. They learn a certain respect, and it's the same with women. And we know that when a young lady goes bad, when she gets gangster, she's on that side, seriously. But when you have people that are in there that help them to become who they are, constantly putting that in their head, then the behavior can change. Like Leon.
Yes, that was the same, honestly. Someone did believe in me. And I want, Tyler, I want to go in with what Dr. Fred was saying. The importance is, so again, my thing is the onus never falls on the student or the parents, or because then, so when we're talking about kids that when you look at discipline issues, you're talking about economically disadvantaged youth. You're talking about kids that come from trauma and emotional issues that are going on, especially when you're talking in DISD, Dallas ISD. You're talking about South and West Dallas. You're talking about the highest rates of incarceration. We're talking about food deserts. We're talking about food insecurity. All of those things. How do you expect, when you have historic issues that are going on in the community, how do you expect for those parents or kids to come and show up as a whole individual? You know, so it doesn't lie. It never lies on the youth. That's not what that's not what teachers are there for. That's not what education is about. Education is about educating a youth. The onus does not lay with the youth. The onus lays with adults, as you said, the bull elephants. It lies with those who have the power and the authority to make a change and a difference in their lives. That starts with the district. That comes down to the principals. That comes to the teachers. How teachers see the kids, their own implicit biases. All those things is where that lays. It does not. I don't believe that it lays with the students. I just do not believe that. That's like telling a kid to teach themselves, you know, or telling the kid that if you don't fit this, then we have nothing for you. And that's not what we're talking about. That's not education to me.
Right. Thank you. So while we're speaking about behavioral issues, I want to talk and how it's perceived. I want to talk about specifically how MHA Mental Health America, one aspect they focus on is advocating for the assessment of youth mental health, especially for behavioral problems in hopes of curbing apprehension and promoting restoration. And yet, like several panelists have mentioned today, you know, certain problems have been attributed to, well, they're just poorly misbehaved, they're just bad, yada, yada. And there isn't really true assessment on their mental health. So they go through their life thinking that they're bad. Teachers go through, you know, thinking that this is a poor student, and administration as well. And so how do we differentiate? Well, first, how do we dismantle these stigmas of youth and what is bad, what is misbehaved, or like, you know, the difference between that?
So that's a really good question, because I think stigma plays a crucial part in almost everything we do, right? We have these stereotypes that we've built, and we really just, we go ahead and make these assumptions about either the people next to us, the students that we're teaching, and our community members, and it brings on negativity. So stigma in the mental health community, we're looking at, well, I don't want to seem weak. I don't want to be that person that goes and gets mental health care because they think, you know, what the word is, crazy. And I think we really need to take, like I said, a step back and say, you know what, I'm not the only one dealing with this. And many in the school system who seem that they have the bad kid behavior. They're the new kid in school. They get bullied, the bulliers, and all these kids play these stereotypes and these stigmas into their relationships. And I think one of the most crucial parts about this is to talk about it. If we ignore it and we say, well, that's just the way it is, right? It's always, well, they're going to act out. I think we need to act and start talking about the stigma, and that we don't have to play into these stereotypes, just like we don't have to play into the stigma that having a mental health condition makes you different, because it's not. 1 in 5 people have a mental health condition. It's 20% of the population. So when we're looking at students who may have mental health or behavioral health conditions, or who may have experienced trauma, like Dr. Jones and Leon said, a lot of them come from backgrounds that they have, you know, issues in the home. and that we really need to take a look at each individual as an individual, not as a part of a group or not as a part of a stigma or a stereotype. And the way to do that is to start the conversation, like how we are doing today. And, you know, I think the biggest part of that is to really think about early intervention. You know, if we're letting students play into these stereotypes and stigmas and reinforce these stigmas, then we're just giving them more time to have negative experiences. So if we start early and we start having these conversations with our kids early, and talk about social emotional learning and talk about mental health care and education, then it doesn't seem negative. It's normal. We need to talk about it. And one of the biggest things is I'd like to bring up is, you know, mental health conditions, behavioral health conditions, they all have signs and symptoms. So just like how you would a cold or any sort of like illness, you have those signs and symptoms. You start sneezing, you start coughing. Well, mental health conditions, behavioral health conditions have the same, and that can be taught to our kids so they can know, hey, I might need a little help. And so whenever we do this on an early age, they're more likely to break those stigmas within their communities, within their groups. And then also the stigmas of being a bad kid, because they can learn coping strategies and skills to deal with their emotional trauma or deal with their conditions. So yeah, I mean, I think those are the first steps. And I think it's really important to differentiate the fact that some of these kids just need a little bit more attention, and that, you know, not just saying that they're all bad kids, because they're not.
Right. Thank you. I think Leah wanted to ask.
Tracy, I wanted to, first of all, give you your, say something to you about how great, you showed me some pictures earlier, but you know, what does it look like when you're working with difficult kids that come from the backgrounds that we're talking about, the demographic that we're talking about?
Right. And something I learned along the way, it takes a community is so super important, but they don't always have that. Like in my district or my school itself, there's not a lot of support. So I started like researching on different ways where I could bring that pride and those examples and role models to them. So I started just teaching them about their history, about their personal history. Their favorite lesson of the year every single year is when we go over the Birmingham Children's March. They love it. It gives them instant pride. It gives them their history of their background that maybe they hadn't heard before, and it shows them what they can do. And that's like, I do that early in the year, and it's okay to talk about race. You know, the people who say, oh, I don't see color, that's wrong. Everybody should see color. We should just see we should highlight and make it easy to talk about, because not talking about it's not working. That's it.
Thank you.
All right, I did have another great suggestion from the Facebook Live here. We're hearing some things that make a lot of sense, like from Patrick Ware, great gentleman, comes in the coffee shop all the time, talking about how when kids are acting up and getting into trouble, a lot of them may be looking for attention, but we have a lady on our Facebook Live, Miss Amelia, talking about that the parents may not even know how to handle it. So if the parents don't know how to communicate with their children outside of school, then they go to school, the children go to school, they're going to cause more problems because there's not this two-way communication. So two people have now brought up a couple of great points on how do we include parents in maybe some classes on better ways of communication with their children, better ways of providing support for their children instead of maybe just getting angry and upset that their kids are in trouble at school again, that they got kicked out, or that they're in ISS again. Have we seen anything in the mental health field or from Dr. Jones or Mr. Leon's perspective, even Tracy over in Mesquite, are we bridging the gap from schools to parents as well, so we can attack things from both angles?
Well, one of the things that's unique about the program that I teach is that my wife and I both teach it. And so when we come into a school or we're doing a program, we're coming in as a married couple, as a couple with professional advice, but also being able to be real with what we're going through relationship wise and what we dealt with our children and our people that were in our household. So, you know, but they don't really have that in place like they used to. We were able to kind of suggest it when we were in schools and bring and have conversations with the parents to make sure, particularly in after school programs, because once the parent came to pick up the child, if that child went through some type of episode during the day, then we were able to have a conversation with them, with the parent, to share with them what happened, what we talked to the child about, but also to help the parent to understand how they should engage in their child. This is how the child learns. This is what they're feeling emotionally at this particular time. And you have to just and help them to walk their way through the support. My son one time came to me when he was in high school. He graduated from DeSoto, and he said, "Dad, the football coach said I need to do this, this, and this, and blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, we looked at him, we're like, "Dude, what do you think we've been telling you all this time?" You know, it's like, whoa. But the point was, it's like, okay, as long as you got it, all right. And so that's when we talk about the parental reinforcement and having conversations with parents, because as Brian, as they brought up in Facebook Live, that is huge. And we know from watching movies, we know from time that parents have never really, it's difficult for parents to reach their children and to talk to them properly and to help their child navigate through what's going on now, because parents right now are engaged in social media more than their children. We know that social media is rearing our children, is rearing us as adults. And so now that communication has been, even when you look at the commercials, everybody's always on their phone or they're on their tablet. Everybody relies on the social media. So the communication of face-to-face communication is even worse than it was before, because we rely on our cell phones for everything. And we pacify our children and we pacify our teens by giving them cell phones, and we just say, okay, just go do your thing. And so now the child or the student is getting this information from social media and from whatever they're getting, TikTok, whatever they're doing. And so now that communication is even worse. And so we have to put down the cell phones, disengage from the social media, have family time again, talk to your child when they come home, make sure you speak to them with kind words when they're leaving out to school. My wife used to always tell my son, it reminded me like a TV stuff. I'm like, Jesus, you know, she's hugging them and kissing them. I love you, have a good day. And we're looking at each other like, wow, you know, but it sent him to school with a smile on his face. It sent him to school knowing that he had somebody to care for him. And we have to, as a whole society, we have to get back to engaging with talking with each other, particularly with our children.
Perfect.
Go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
No, please. Would you like to respond to Miss Deanne?
Yeah.
So Deanne had a comment.
So, and she believes like I believe. I believe in mental health, labeling mental health, and finding out, like, openly finding out what's going on with your kid, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's a grief issue or trauma issue. Like what she says is address the lack of trust in the Black community when it comes to labeling our kids. I come from that old school like that. So I don't believe it's hard for, we've seen historically that the education system has labeled or excessively labeled and then excluded Black kids because of their labels. I mean, it used to be talked about special ed. And Megan, you can speak to this after that and maybe correct if I'm wrong. But, those when you start labeling kids like that early, then you set up something, you put something inside of someone, you change how they perceive themselves, you change how they look at themselves, you change how they react to things. The same way we're talking, this whole thing is about discipline. The same thing is when you start, again, data has shown that in-school suspension, out-of-school exclusionary practices tend to, especially when you're dealing with elementary kids and middle school kids, it tends to alienate the child, and it produces more anger. So if you're talking about, by all means, please, if you have an issue, a mental health issue, be willing to see that, be willing to recognize that. But also we have to be vigilant to not having an over-labeling of Black and brown youth, just because then that does set them apart from something that doesn't put them on the same track. It's just as when you start talking about kids being kicked out of school in 3rd grade, then they are more likely not to graduate. That has historically been, this whole thing that we're talking about, the school to prison pipeline is a theory, and it's an analytical theory that really is a way to enforce and normalize the locking up or the shutting down of Black youth. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about 50 years ago, programs and things that were put in place that, that Black kids couldn't, if they thought different, acted different, they were penalized for that. When they also, when they started doing things in the community with over-policing and with strict discipline problems, all of this was a way to shut down Black liberation. And so that's what we're talking about. So labeling your kids, there is a mistrust, but what we do about it is open conversation and being bold enough to go up and talk to and say to the principal, to the counselor, I don't believe this. Show me why. Prove to me why. Stand up for you. Like Fred said, you have to be involved in your kids' education. You have to be involved in your kids' lives. And for those kids that don't have the opportunity to have that because maybe their kids are incapacitated, or when I say incapacitated, we're talking about systemic things like incarceration and things like that. We're talking about drug addiction. We're talking all of those systemic issues. When those are in place, then the school needs and the district needs to step up and substitute for that. Because again, this is about education. This is not about a one-size-fits-all thing. So, and we're specifically here talking about the kids that already are not a part of the one-size-fits-all. So then we definitely need to make a concession for them. We definitely need to put programs in place. We need to spend money to make sure that they get what they need.
Fantastic.
Okay. Megan, I know you have something to say.
I was just going to say you are completely right. Whenever you label someone and then you affirm that, saying you're going to do this, you're a bad kid, negative after negative, and then that person or that kid or child then starts to say that to themselves as an affirmation. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So you're going to be exactly what they tell you to be. But I believe that, like you said, being involved and talking about it, because those conversations are hard to have with your kids. And it takes a simple Google search to say, hey, how do I talk about mental health? And I promise you there is literature everywhere to help you take those first steps. And to have those conversations with your kids. And you don't have to be a parent. You can be a cousin, an aunt, a brother, or sister. It doesn't matter. If you're an adult in this child's life, we all need to take a little bit of responsibility and learn about our mental health and about theirs, because we all play a role in this. And no, I applaud you, because it's true that if we continue to look at children or colored youth to look as a negative stereotype, then we're not giving them much room to grow. And we definitely need to start funding programs that work, start giving them the opportunity to succeed, and to give them the mental health resources, the resources they need to access care and to understand their own mental health.
Definitely seems to be a big need. I think that's going to be one takeaway that we should address next month. So we can talk about some action items towards the end of this that we'll be able to split up some things. But we're hearing from a lot of people on Facebook Live about the mental health needs of parents outside of school to really improve the lives of children while they're in school. So maybe that's something we can touch on over the next 30 days or so. Ms. Tyler, do you have a couple other things?
Yes. So one thing I really wanted to get some insight about, because I love, like, I still talk to my kindergarten teachers. So like, I love all of my teachers, and I really think that they are a huge resource in basically the support system of the school. They're the reason that the school is able to function. So going off of that, teachers tend to be the biggest enforcers of discipline due to their close and frequent contact with students. When we speak of reform and change in disciplinary policy, teachers are the ones who end up bearing the most responsibility of keeping order while also trying to actively teach students. Is there any insight as to how expanded counseling and social work services might impact teachers' responsibilities? I don't know if Ms. Tracy would want to respond first, or whoever.
Yes, it would definitely be helpful, but the problem is that every couple of years they'll bring in a new program. Like we were talking about mental health, it seems like every other year we're learning a whole new system, and we don't keep any programs in place long enough for us to actually master them in order to be able to then use them properly. That's the biggest problem that I've seen so far.
Anybody else have comments?
That goes into budgets, where the money is used or not used. And that's exactly what happens, is there's no consistency once a program is established or once there's a pathway, which leads to trust issues. Because I know that you keep saying that we're going to do this, you bring something in, the community sees that you're bringing something in and trying to do something, and then all of a sudden the principal that was at that school is released, or we find that the school board has changed and it's changed directions, or we find that there's self-sabotaging going on within the school because there's some jealousies or some hateration going on with a program that's brought in, all right, and it seems to be taking over. And so now, as a student and even as a teacher, you're going to just go ahead and be rogue, and you're just going to do things on your own because there's no trust. And that's one of the biggest things that when I'm having a meeting, that's the one of the first things I told Leon when we first met and we were discussing some things. I said, the community doesn't trust what people say they're going to do because they haven't done what they say they were going to do in the first place.
Exactly.
So we have to build the trust back up. We have to build the trust through consistency and allowing the people to come in and do the jobs that they know that are trained to do what they do, and get away with the hateration, get away from the budget, get away from the photo ops and all the other things that go along, because the child and the community is suffering from this because of people's egos and problems.
Right. So kind of going along with that, did anybody else have comments before I move on? Okay. So yeah, kind of going off of that, I know Duncanville doesn't officially endorse zero policy. When I was looking at code of conduct, I was searching for, zero tolerance. I was searching for zero tolerance because the way some administrators acted at Duncanville, you would swear that we were under zero tolerance, but that's for another day. But I couldn't find it. And so it was just interesting to me because it's like, okay, well, you see the discriminatory effects that zero tolerance can have. And so you don't officially endorse it, yet the practice is still feels very real whenever I, as a student, am in your hallway. And not only me, other students felt that as well. So, and I know zero tolerance policies tend to result in discretionary referrals for, it can even be dress code, a student talking back, and, you know, that just goes back into not figuring out the root of the problem. But for zero tolerance policies, we tend to have these quick responses. Okay, you talk back 3 days ISS, you're out of the class. You get sent home, you get sent to Summit, if it's severe enough, you get sent to juvie. So how do we switch from these short-term solutions to long-term solutions, like what you were just talking about, Dr. Fred?
I'm going to jump in with that one first. I'm going to go off of data. So, okay. You know, that's the reason we have data. And I will say this at first: we spend more money on researching things than we do on actual programming that we put into place. And instead of following what the data shows, we never follow through with that. So that's the first part. The second thing is, data shows that when you look at both Duncanville and DISD, the data shows that, like I said earlier, in the middle schools in Dallas ISD, they're 8 times more likely to use out-of-school suspension for minor offenses that when you look at the data and it says, and it states that this was just a school code violation, not mandatory things, but school code violations, minor things that could be discussed. We're not talking about, nobody's, for myself, I'm not arguing that if a kid brings a gun to school, do we make some type of concession, bring them, helping them out. But when we're talking about minor infractions, and then when you look at data and see that that you have a disciplined population of 9,000, but you have 18 to 21,000 incidents, that means that the kids are repeating. Those are the same kids that are repeating or being put back into the same situation without anything being done, speaking to what you talked about earlier. So, we have to look at the fact that 20 to 30% of our students are dealing with discipline issues. Of those 20 to 30% of those are economically disadvantaged, at-risk youth, special ed kids that we need to be taking time with. We need to be taking the opportunity to help them. To me, it makes no sense that a special ed kid gets put in out-of-school suspension. That's like common sense. That to me is common sense. When you have kids that are dealing with, again, issues, economic issues and historically disproportionate food issues and over incarceration. When we're talking about that, it's just common sense to me that we would have someone there before you suspend them, before you kick them out of school. Find out what's going on, figure out what needs to be done. But that, again, as Fred was saying, goes to budgeting. That goes with what Megan was saying about caring. That talks with everything that we've talked about tonight. It's about actually caring about the kids. We're not talking about the ones that the 70 and 80% that are doing fine, that are passing and doing whatever. We're talking about actually making an effort to deal with those 20 or 30% that deserve the same amount of care and education as the rest.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback a little bit on that. So, you mentioned data, and data can be extremely powerful. It's a tool. It's a tool for every single one of us. And I think when schools are reporting on programming that is working, and other school districts are reporting on programming that is working and that other districts can implement, as an advocate, you've got to use that data as something to advocate for, to bring this up to your superintendent and to the board of trustees and say, hey, look, these programs are working. And that is one way to be effective, and to make sure that if, like Tracy said, if these programs are coming in and out and nobody's being consistent, but we have data to prove that it is consistent and it does work, then we need to urge our elected officials, on the board, that we need to keep up with this or maybe make improvements. And as parents and constituents of that school district, that is one tool that needs to be utilized, and it's not always utilized. So as a mental health advocate and an advocate to disrupt this school to prison pipeline, we got to put that work in and use that data as a tool.
Yeah, but we also know too, Megan, that the prison pipeline.
That cut out at the end. Thank you guys for that. Anybody else want to chime in?
I was just going to say that, Megan, we know that the prison pipeline is a moneymaker. It's on the stock exchange. It produces millions and millions of dollars, and a lot of companies are using prison labor to make themselves profitable. And we know that that starts with our children, and particularly when we talk about the juvenile system. So we also have to deal with from a policy point of view and an advocation point of view, and almost even a lobbying point of view. We have to be able to match up, because what we're saying is true, but the reality is that school boards don't often respond. The reality is that city management and city governments and state officials don't often respond. We know that Texas is pretty ranked on the bottom when it comes to education. It's ranked on the bottom when it comes to healthcare for students. The wealth gap is huge, particularly in Dallas. So that has nothing to do with anything that we want to do for our children. That's from the top, where the money is supposed to be funneled down, not getting to that point, because sadly, nobody's going to come in there and just volunteer their time on a day in and day basis to work with somebody else's child. Right. Those are some of the harsh realities. But we have to come together, and I think, Brian, this is for you particularly with your business, is we have to come together as a coalition and as a cohesive unit. And when we go to these places, we go in as a power group. We have Tyler, who's representing a certain segment. We have Tracy. We have all of us who are representing, and then we collectively go in there and we start to force some issues that need to be done, because right now that's not happening, and it's never really happened. I do know one thing, and then I'll leave that alone too. When you go into some of these Hispanic schools that are predominantly Mexican Hispanics, when they have a PTO meeting or they have something going on, they all show up.
Full house.
Okay, they are there in droves. Mm-hmm. And that's why they get the schools, that's why they get the fundings, because their community is responding to what their needs of their children, and they're there. And so if we're going to be open and honest, we have to understand that there's some apathy out there that expects just the work to be done by a few people. What the Bible says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Okay, and so we have to respond and be very open and honest about the battles that we have to fight, but we also have to know that we're going to be fighting a lot of these fights on our own, and we have to be prepared for that with a support like we're doing now and what Brian has brought us together to do.
Thank you. I have one more question before I personally want to wrap up, and then I'll let Brian take back over. But so I took a survey of our community from, I took a survey of our community from current to former students, parents, faculty, staff, and 50% of the respondents believe that the presence of uniformed campus police is necessary, and 16% remain neutral, which 66% are not outright opposed to the idea of campus police. Yet 86% of respondents are somewhat or very concerned about police presence upon the return to campus, being that if school was to be in session fall 2020, they would be concerned. So it seems that there's a reliance upon police officers and security to maintain order, yet their presence is still worrying to many. So my question is, are campus police a necessity to maintain order in schools? Anybody who wants to answer, doesn't matter.
Simple answer.
I'll start with that. And then I want to hear from Tracy because I want to hear teachers' point of perspective. But, you know, there was a conversation I had with someone, and they were in the PD and in ISD PD. But it's, you know, it's not the fact. We had liaison officers when I was young, but we had one, and he did officer related things when it was necessary, right? But then what we don't need is someone taking over or being involved in an aspect of education or school life that they're not qualified or designated by school code to do. So what I'm saying is, if you have an officer in school that's going to be there, or even if you get rid of the officers, but the police come when the PD comes when you're called, because there's a difference between ISD PD and GPD. I don't think you need to have an in-school officer if the DPD is going to respond. If it comes to that and the DPD needs to respond, I think and I believe that if we invest in social workers, if we put more mental health practitioners in place, we can and start putting some sort of justice practices in place from the district down. We can do some mindfulness, all these things, all these practices, again, like Megan was saying, that are proven to make changes. If we put those in practice, in place, then I think we could do from a policy level and on a school level. I mean, you know, DISD does have a mindfulness. Dallas ISD does have a mindfulness page on their website, but it is not mandated to be used. I think we need to start doing all these things that we know work. We know that these things work. So why are we not making policy to do these things, to put these practices in place? Why are we not educating our teachers on or supporting our teachers? It's crazy that teachers don't get the support that they need. Teachers are humans. They go through the same things. And like Fred said, I'm getting paid to put up with your kids. So I need support. I need backing. I need an understanding. I need some training to deal with things on my end as well. I think we just need to, it's not revamp. I think we need to tear down and start over and just create a new educational system that is strength-based, that's community-based, that has an understanding that we don't need police, we need social workers, we need programs that are in place for our teachers and our students, and just a new spending, how we budget our money. We're spending too much money on creating new things with the same infrastructure and the same practices in place. That's like telling an alcoholic not to drink. I mean, really, and they haven't changed anything. You're going to drink, you're eventually going to go back to the same issues and the same problems. So that's my 2 cents.
That was like a quarter, Leon. Jeez.
You know what? We're live, so I have to behave. Tracy, please speak up before I say something that.
From my experience right now, honestly, the police force has lost so much credibility with not just the people in the areas that I teach, but I mean, everywhere. If they're going to come to our schools in the way that they're doing now, it's just going to divide it even more. If we're going to bring policemen to our schools, they need to come and they need to get on the level of the kids and they need to talk to them and they need to start building that bridge, because it's not up to the kids to build that bridge. It's up to them.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. So yeah, I think that wraps up everything that I wanted to discuss. So Brian, if you want to take back over, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So we do just have, might have one more thing from Facebook Live to bring up here. Dr. Jones, a lot of comments about what you've been talking about with the for-profit prison problem, with about it taking a village. The harvest is plentiful, laborers are few. But we can find people that will help. We need to find the people that will help in any situation that we find ourselves in, and there are plenty to choose from right now. One thing, let's bring this up to the group, and I really do believe that we can start wrapping up. It's 8:03 at this point, but I wanted to get this in. Ms. Deanne did bring up one more thing. Has the school system ever considered implementing a standard form for all students using the ACE scores, ACE? One of you guys will have to help me with that. Just the no kids guy over here. Then reaching out to relevant teachers and families to begin the conversation. So they considered implementing a standard form for all students using the ACE scores, ACE scores. Leon, Tracy.
So the ACE score is an abuse, neglect, and adverse childhood experiences. I'm not sure, you know, what schools may have implemented that kind of testing, and if it's uniform across the state. But what I can say is that those types of testing could be beneficial as far as early intervention. As you know, I've said several times, just to reiterate the fact that, you know, we need to take a look at all these issues early on in the child's development and how that plays a part.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to, I don't know if this is really, this is a shameless plug, I guess I'll say.
Uh-oh. Get it in there, get it in there.
So you asked me, you know, when we started this, we were talking about, you asked me about PEP, and I didn't feel it was the time to say that. But everything that we've talked about, you asked, so PEP is about creating coalitions and bringing these to walking alongside ISDs, counselors, administration. And we have someone on our curriculum team that has a peer in mental health curriculum. They talk about teaching youth how to recognize, and they go back in and help other youth, which is powerful. We have mentoring classes with Dr. Fred. We have a soft and hard skills course that I teach called Destination Known. That's actually good. But what we're talking about on a whole is actually community schooling, and including mental health, including workshops for teachers, including day-to-day help for teachers, mindfulness. We have that in our curriculum. What we're trying to do is just create a new education, make education truly educational, community education. I'm a revolutionary and revolutionist by heart. You know, I think about when Black Panthers, when they created programs. You know, in every great revolution, you have to have, it's not just about fighting, it's not just about doing anything, it's about doing programs that actually make a difference in the day-to-day lives of people. And that's what PEP is trying to do. That's the purpose, that's why I'm here. That's what we're talking about, that's why PEP is here. And like other people, like Fred was saying, Megan said, it takes coalition building. It's not going to get done with just one person. I can say Dallas Core does a great job with some things that they're doing. You know, it just needs to, TOP does a great job. The Texas Appleseed. Everybody coming together and making one change and making one voice. But then, like like Fred was saying, and like you said, Megan, it's going to take finally that the districts start listening. They need to start listening that people are not saying this just to say things. It's actually that this is proven data. This is things that have been proven to work. Let's make a change. Let's make a different system so that every kid can have an opportunity, like Duncanville says, to write their own success story. So that was my shameless plug.
I wouldn't call it shameless. I think you did a very good job of it.
Yes, sir.
All right, so from the group, we don't have a lot of questions or comments coming in from Facebook Live at this point. I would call it a massive success. We got 84 comments over the past hour on our Facebook Live feed. So what I would want to do at this time, any closing remarks, any closing comments based on what we have spoken about tonight from any of our panelists. Give us your 2-minute elevator speech on what you'd like to see happen from here on out, or if you think we didn't cover something that you think we should. Who would like to go? Hop on in. Hop on in.
So I'll go ahead and say, thank you for hosting this. I think one of the most powerful things of coalitions and grouping is talking about the issues that we need to face. If we continue to sweep it under the rug and act like it's not a problem, nothing's going to get solved. So, thank you for everyone that's on here. Thank you, Tyler, for bringing up these important issues that you've experienced. I think it's extremely important to see it from the point of view of teachers, especially Tracy, students, parents' point of view, so that we can begin to really tackle the issues on hand. And that, I guess, bringing this up, as the conversation begins, as from the mental health perspective, I'm going to go ahead and put that out there. Make sure that you're checking in on yourself. Make sure that you're checking. Right now, the times are tough. The COVID pandemic has really put a strain on every single one of us. And as we start gearing up to school, the rise of anxiety on how our kids are going to be treated, how our teachers are going to be treated, the entire system, I think it's important to really take a step back and really think about our own mental health and the mental health of our students. And to know that there are free resources out there. On our website, mhadallas.org, we've got free screenings. So really take advantage of your local organizations willing to give you that support line that's really needed right now. And that's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much for participating. I've got reams of knowledge I'm gaining from this. Ooh, it could be like a game show. I'm just going to spotlight video people that are going to speak next on the way out.
I'll volunteer myself before I'm voluntold. So
the perfect student.
So yes, as a former student of Duncanville, I am very glad that I got to be in on this conversation and ask important questions and be able to get some insight from people much wiser than me. I hope to follow in you guys' footsteps. So you guys are truly an inspiration, and thank you for taking time out of your day to dedicate your life and your work to these causes and improve the lives of youth, especially Black and Brown youth and people who don't have a voice for themselves. So truly excited that I got to be a part of this. Thank you, Brian and Leon, for having me. I appreciate it so much, and I am very I'm looking forward to the changes, hopefully that's to come in Duncanville and other local ISDs. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Dr. Fred said make it short, so I'm going to do that real quick. I do want to say, I want to give a shout out to Duncanville ISD and the trustee board. They have a meeting coming up on Monday. Not sure exactly what's going to be happening there, but I do want to say congratulate them on the work that they're doing. Same with DISD, Dallas ISD. Thank you for continuing to move forward with our youth and helping our youth. Just let's look at some proven things that work and put those in place and put the money where things work. So since that budget's coming up, please vote for more social workers and less exclusionary practices and policies. So.
Thank you very much, Sam.
I agree.
Oh man, I was trying to catch the top of his head.
I know. See, Tyler, don't underestimate who you are at this particular point. When I was 18, somebody would have invited me to a meeting like this. I would have said, seriously? I was out, it was party time, so I wasn't thinking about that. But we also weren't dealing with the situations that people are dealing with now. My life growing up was, and when we reflect back, was pretty easy. We all had parents, and everything was, we didn't have these issues that children are dealing with. So I'm just going to close and say, Leon is doing a good thing, and Brian, and the other thing that's important is that the communities need to hear different voices, because what also happens is the community gets tone deaf to hearing the same voices all the time. And it's kind of like that Charlie Brown thing, we're going womp, 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 womp. And so to have different voices, to bring in different faces, to share sharing concerns that are coming from a different viewpoint or a different mouthpiece is really, really, really critical at this time. And all hands have to be on deck. All hands have to be on deck. So I'm just glad to be here. And Leon, I'll send you my bill.
Yes, sir. Can I give one more quick shout out? I want to give a shout out to Miss Jackie Colton. She was on our earlier meeting, new trustee for Place One. I want to thank her for having the courage to come on. I want to thank her for what she's for listening to different ideas and having an open mind. And I hope that she continues to influence Duncanville ISD, the Board of Trustees, along with all the other great trustees. Ms. Phillips, again, thank you for reaching out to me, and I know that you guys are going to make a good vote and a good change. And for Superintendent Mark, I'm believing in you. I hope everything goes well, and I'm looking forward to seeing a change. Thank you.
Tyler got up there before she was voluntold. Thank you very much. She may be on the next Facebook Live from Texas A&M. We'll see what we can work out. It's always nice having a special guest. So tracking Facebook Live, a lot of people are saying good night. Thank you very much, Patrick Ware. Keisha's watching with you. Awesome. Amelia is talking about restorative justice. I think we're going to throw that on next month. So on August 21st, we will be doing another youth justice and voter rights and voter suppression Zoom to Facebook Live. Now, we will need more people from the community to be a panelist on this Zoom. So one commitment that I would like anybody watching this cast right now, and we've got 11 people, we've had up to 18 people. This is going to be posted on the Black and Bitter timeline. Hopefully hundreds of people take a look at it. But one commitment that I would ask out of you is, so we're focused on youth justice today. We're focused on voter rights next month and going into November. We're going to be talking about environmental impact. But on a day-to-day basis, all of this comes from the Black Lives Matter platform. And your commitment, your action item is, what are you doing every single day to fight systemic racism? This is a Zoom with a bunch of friends. This is a Facebook Live video. This ain't gonna cut it. So as a community of 40,000 people that live in Duncanville, what are you doing every single day to fight systemic racism and make this community better and more equal for everyone? When you hear that, if that bothers you, then that's a problem that you need to confront. If I can help you do that, because we may be friends, you may come to Black and Bitter, you may come to Mudhook for drinking coffee or drinking something else. But if I can help you with that, hey, let's start a conversation, because it needs to be had. This is a community of every single color. Duncanville is very diverse in that way. It's 33, 33, 33, split along racial divides. But we have challenges just like every single community. So if hearing that we're standing up for a Black Lives Matter platform on those three tiers at least bothers you, or you don't know where to start, or you don't know where you fit in, let's figure it out, because we need allies all over the city, all over the country to get through some of these problems. And we start in a hyper-local, community-based way. And that's what we're trying to contribute to today, tomorrow, and going forward. So August 21st will be our next forum. Again, it'll include youth justice, and it will include voter rights and voter suppression, with a few different panelists supporting that. So thank you for watching. Panelists, thank you for being on. This discussion was hands down one of my favorite moments in the past few years, and being in business and everything. Coming from a former juvenile delinquent, I think I learned quite a few things. Not everybody's a Tyler Ransom, being on here and on her college break trying to solve the world's problems.
Or Fred Jones, who was a wonderful student.
Oh yeah, it really was. Perfectly innocent, perfectly innocent. So I've learned a lot. I appreciate everybody's time on here. I'm going to conclude the Facebook Live. And I really look forward to next month. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you panelists. And panelists, we conclude our conversation here shortly.